6 years after marrying Mason Holloway, he finally looked me in the eyes and admitted something that should have shattered my world. I never loved you, Savannah. Instead of breaking down, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Finally, it was over. The role I had been trapped inside for years had finally reached its ending. Mason misunderstood my silence. He slowly slid a dark envelope across the kitchen island of our luxury home, nestled in the foothills outside Boulder, Colorado. Beyond the panoramic windows, fresh snow blanketed the pine trees while the Rocky Mountains disappeared into low clouds. Inside the envelope was a platinum debit card. "There's enough money here for you," Mason said calmly. "And for Owen." His voice carried no anger. "No guilt. Only certainty." I lowered my head and allowed my shoulders to shake. Years of experience made crying effortless. "Mason." My voice trembled perfectly. "We've been married for 6 years. We built a family together. We have a son." I looked up through watery eyes. "How can you leave us like this?" For a brief second, his expression softened. He stepped closer and gently brushed a tear from my cheek. Once upon a time, that tiny gesture had convinced me I mattered. After every disagreement, he'd pull me into his arms, kiss my forehead, and whisper, "Come here, don't stay mad at your husband." I believed those moments meant love. I convinced myself that love could grow with time, that one day he would look at me the way he once looked at Elise Thornton. But standing here now, I finally understood. He had never stopped loving her. Not even for a single day. He quietly placed the bank card into my hand. "This should cover everything." Then he walked toward the front door. Snowflakes drifted through the air as the door slowly closed behind him. I watched until his truck disappeared down the mountain road. Only then did I finally exhale. "So, it's finished." A familiar mechanical voice echoed inside my mind. "Mission complete. Primary target successfully returned to intended fate. Host is now authorized to begin the next assignment." I closed my eyes. "So, I'm finally free." Affirmative. For the first time in years, I smiled. Not because my marriage had ended, because my sentence had. Most people think divorce starts when someone signs papers. Mine started 7 years earlier, long before I ever met Mason Holloway. Back then, I wasn't supposed to become the heroine of anyone's story. I wasn't even supposed to exist. I was simply a temporary character. The system had selected Mason as my assignment. A successful real estate developer from Colorado. Disciplined, intelligent, emotionally unavailable. According to destiny, his true soulmate had always been Elise Thornton. Circumstances had pulled them apart. My mission was simple. Enter his life. Marry him. Help him build the future he needed. Create stability. Raise his child. Then quietly disappear once fate reunited the two people who truly belonged together. It sounded simple, until I actually lived it. No one warned me what pretending to love someone for years would do to a person. Especially when somewhere along the way, the pretending stopped feeling like pretending. "Mom!" The small voice pulled me back to reality. 7-year-old Owen Holloway stood halfway down the staircase, still wearing dinosaur pajamas and clutching his favorite stuffed wolf. His dark hair was messy. His brown eyes looked exactly like Mason's. He glanced toward the empty driveway. "Dad left." I forced another heartbreaking smile. "Yeah." He stayed quiet for several seconds. Then he asked, "Is he going to live with Aunt Elise now?" Children always notice more than adults realize. I nodded gently. "Probably." He thought about it. Then he quietly said something I wasn't expecting. "I want to go too." Time seemed to stop. Not because the words hurt, because deep down, I'd always known they were coming. The system immediately interrupted. Emotional fluctuation detected. Recommendation: maintain professional detachment. Easy for a machine to say. Owen wasn't just part of Mason's story anymore. He had become part of mine. I remembered teaching him how to tie his shoes, helping him build snow forts every winter, reading the same bedtime story hundreds of nights in a row, watching him run into my arms after preschool. Even though the system had suppressed almost every sensation during pregnancy, couldn't erase 7 years of memories afterward. I knelt until we were eye level. "Why do you want to live with Aunt Elise?" His face immediately lit up. "She always plays with me." He smiled proudly. "She says I'm the funniest kid she's ever met." Then he added something far more painful. "Dad smiles more when she's around." The innocence of children could be devastating. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He simply believed everyone deserved to be happy, even if he didn't yet understand what happiness sometimes cost. I gently brushed the hair away from his forehead. If Aunt Elise became your mom, I asked softly, would that make you happy? He hesitated. Only for a second. Then he nodded. I think so. Silence settled across the house. Outside, snow continued falling over the Colorado pines. Inside, an invisible chapter quietly came to its end. Owen suddenly remembered something. He ran into the living room and returned carrying a small hand-carved wooden elk we'd bought together during a Christmas festival in Estes Park just a few days earlier. He carefully wrapped it back inside its paper bag. I've been saving this. For Aunt Elise. I think she'll love it. The system spoke again. Host. Are you experiencing sadness? I looked at my son. Then at the small wooden gift. Finally, I quietly shook my head. No. Because sadness wasn't what filled my heart anymore. Freedom was. And for the very first time in 7 years, freedom felt wonderful. 3 days later, Mason officially moved into a modern house overlooking Cherry Creek Reservoir in Denver. It wasn't a secret. Friends talked. Neighbors whispered. Social media did the rest. Elise Thornton had finally returned to Colorado after years working in Seattle, and within a week she was appearing in every photo beside Mason. Everyone called it fate. No one questioned how quickly everything had happened. No one except me. Not because I was jealous. Because I knew the truth. Every coincidence. Every missed opportunity. Every unexpected reunion. Nothing had been accidental. The mission had simply reached its final chapter. Or at least, it should have. Owen packed his favorite clothes into a small blue suitcase. I watched him carefully fold his baseball cap before placing it on top. Mom. Yeah. Do you think Aunt Elise will let me have pancakes for dinner? I smiled. Probably. And maybe she'll let me stay up late to watch movies. I wouldn't be surprised. He grinned. For a 7-year-old, this wasn't divorce. It was the beginning of a new adventure. Couldn't blame him. Children rarely understood what adults hid behind polite smiles. The front doorbell rang. Mason stood outside wearing the same navy wool coat he'd worn during our first Christmas together. For a second, old memories tried to resurface. Family trips through Rocky Mountain National Park. Snowball fights. Birthday dinners. Lazy Sunday mornings. Then I remembered. Those memories belonged mostly to me. For him, they had simply filled the empty years while waiting for someone else. Owen ready? Yeah. Mason stepped inside. Neither of us spoke. The silence between strangers is awkward. The silence between former spouses is heavier. Owen came running downstairs with his suitcase. Dad. Mason smiled instantly. The biggest smile I'd seen on his face in months. He hugged his son tightly. You ready? Yep. He grabbed my hand for a second. I'll come visit, Mom. I know. He leaned closer and whispered, don't get lonely. I almost laughed. Children really did believe loneliness was something you could simply decide not to feel. I'll be okay. He nodded confidently. I know you will. Then the two of them walked toward Mason's truck. Halfway there, Owen suddenly turned around. He sprinted back toward me. For one impossible second, I thought he had changed his mind. Instead, he reached into his backpack. Oh, I almost forgot. He carefully pulled out the small wooden elk. I need this. So Aunt Elise can put it in her room. He smiled proudly before running back to Mason. The truck disappeared down the winding mountain road. I stood alone on the porch until the sound of the engine vanished beneath the wind. Then, I laughed. A quiet, almost exhausted laugh. The system sounded confused. Host? What? Emotional response does not match expected behavioral pattern. I know. I looked toward the empty driveway. For 7 years I believed leaving this family would destroy me. I smiled faintly. It didn't. The following Monday, I signed the lease for a downtown apartment in Denver's Lodo district. Small, modern, quiet. No photographs on the walls. No toys scattered across the floor. No reminders of the life I'd left behind. Just sunlight pouring through oversized industrial windows. For the first time in years, every object inside belonged to me. No compromises. No pretending. No carefully maintaining the image of the perfect wife. I unpacked exactly 1 coffee mug. 1 plate. 1 bowl. 1 blanket. Felt strangely peaceful. The system interrupted again. Host. I know. Your next assignment has already been selected. I figured. A glowing notification appeared inside my mind. Next primary target identified. Name, Garrett Mercer. Age 35. Location, Denver, Colorado. Occupation, corporate attorney. Relationship to previous target. Closest friend for over 15 years. I blinked. Seriously? Affirmative. You couldn't have picked someone farther away? Negative. I buried my face in my hands. This has to be a joke. Garrett Mercer. Of every person in Colorado, the system had chosen Mason's oldest friend. Unfortunately, I knew Garrett. Tall, sharp-minded, dangerously observant. Unlike Mason, Garrett noticed everything. Every lie, every hesitation, every fake smile. And unlike Mason, he had never liked me. Not once. Every time Mason invited me to dinner with his friends, Garrett somehow managed to bring the conversation back to Elise. Not rudely, not directly, just enough to remind everyone where Mason's heart truly belonged. At the time, I thought Garrett was trying to sabotage my marriage. Now, I realized he'd simply been telling the truth. The system displayed another message. Objective. Establish emotional connection. I stared at the ceiling. Do you have any idea how much Garrett dislikes me? Probability of success remains acceptable. Acceptable? He barely tolerated being in the same room as me. No response. Typical. Machines loved statistics. Humans had to live with them. That Friday evening, I found myself sitting alone inside an upscale rooftop lounge overlooking downtown Denver. The city lights shimmered against the mountains in the distance. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. Business executives laughed over expensive whiskey. Couples celebrated anniversaries. I wasn't there for the view. I was waiting. Across the room, Garrett Mercer sat alone near the panoramic windows. One hand rested casually around a crystal glass. His posture was relaxed. His expression unreadable. The system quietly whispered, "Target acquired." I took a slow breath. 7 years ago, approaching Mason had been easy. Back then I played the role of an innocent 19-year-old hopelessly in love. Now, I was a 30-year-old divorced woman. Garrett wasn't the kind of man who believed in coincidences. If I made one wrong move, he'd see straight through me. And somehow, that possibility made my heart beat faster than it had in years. I didn't move. Not immediately. Garrett Mercer wasn't the kind of man you casually walked up to. He noticed everything. The way people carried themselves. The pauses between sentences. The tiny expressions most people never saw. 7 years ago, whenever Mason brought me to gatherings with his closest friends, Garrett had always looked at me with quiet suspicion. Not hostility. Curiosity. As if he couldn't quite figure out why something about me felt off. The system interrupted my thoughts. "Host, your hesitation is reducing mission efficiency." I silently rolled my eyes. "You've clearly never had to flirt with someone who can read people for a living." Garrett wasn't just a corporate attorney. He negotiated billion-dollar mergers. He dismantled witnesses during depositions. He built his career spotting lies before other people realized they were telling them. Trying to fool him sounded exhausting. I reached for my glass. Maybe one drink would calm my nerves. Then another. Still not enough. The bartender smiled politely. "Another old-fashioned?" I nodded. "Please." As he mixed the drink, I kept stealing glances toward Garrett. He hadn't touched his phone once. He simply watched the Denver skyline stretching beyond the glass walls. Like someone completely comfortable being alone. Interesting. The system responded instantly. Target displays unusually high emotional self-regulation. No kidding. The fresh drink arrived. I took one slow sip. Then another. Maybe I was overthinking this. Maybe I just needed to introduce myself like a normal person. Before I could stand, the elevator doors opened. My stomach dropped. Mason walked onto the rooftop. Beside him, Elise. She laughed at something he'd whispered, slipping her arm naturally through his. They looked exactly like the couple everyone expected them to become years ago. As though the last 6 years had never happened. The system immediately analyzed the situation. Unexpected complication detected. "You think." I instinctively turned away before Mason could notice me. Garrett was still sitting near the windows, completely unaware. Or so I thought. The lounge suddenly became much louder as a birthday party entered from the opposite side. People crossed between the tables. Servers carried trays of champagne. For a few seconds, Garrett disappeared behind the crowd. Perfect. If I left now, nobody would see me. I grabbed my purse and headed toward the hallway leading to the elevators. "Leaving already?" A calm voice stopped me. I froze. Slowly, I turned around. Garrett stood only a few feet away. One hand tucked inside the pocket of his charcoal gray jacket. The other still holding his glass. His blue eyes studied me carefully. Not rudely, just thoroughly. I didn't see you arrive, he said. I just got here. It wasn't entirely a lie. He tilted his head slightly. You've looked at my table at least 12 times. I blinked. 12. I stopped counting after 12. Heat rushed to my face. Fantastic. Mission day 1. And I'd already been caught. The system remained painfully optimistic. Conversation established successfully. I don't think that's what success looks like. Garrett raised an eyebrow. Talking to yourself? I laughed awkwardly. Just thinking out loud. He didn't look convinced. Before either of us could say another word, a familiar voice echoed across the lounge. Garrett. Mason. Garrett glanced over my shoulder. Looks like I'm being summoned. I turned just enough to see Mason and Elise walking toward us. Panic instantly surged through me. If Mason saw me standing here with Garrett, questions would follow. Questions I had no interest in answering. Without thinking, I stepped backward. Unfortunately, there was nowhere to go. Garrett noticed. So that's what this is. What? You're hiding from him. I wouldn't call it hiding. What would you call it? I searched for an answer. Nothing came. Mason's footsteps grew closer. Garrett. He was only seconds away now. Instinct took over. I moved beside Garrett, using his tall frame to block Mason's view. He looked down at me. You know, he said quietly, this is the strangest greeting I've received in quite a while. I'll explain later. If there is a later. There will be. He considered that. Then, without warning, he shifted half a step, completely shielding me from Mason's line of sight. His broad shoulders formed an effortless wall between us. Mason stopped beside him. There you are. Garrett casually took another sip of his drink. You've been difficult to find. I wasn't trying to be found. Elise smiled. We thought you'd already left. No. Garrett's tone remained perfectly calm. I've been entertaining unexpected company. I held my breath. Mason glanced around. Who? Garrett didn't even look at me. A nervous woman. My heart nearly stopped. Elise laughed softly. Someone you know? Garrett answered without hesitation. Not yet. Silence. A strange silence. One that seemed to stretch much longer than it actually did. Finally Mason shrugged. Come sit with us. Garrett looked toward their table. Then back toward the city skyline. I'll pass. You sure? Very. Elise smiled politely. Another time, then. The two of them walked away. I waited until they disappeared into the far side of the lounge before finally exhaling. I owe you one. Garrett looked down at me. Do you? You just saved me. I don't remember agreeing to that. I laughed. For real this time. So why did you help? He studied me for several seconds before answering. Because. You looked relieved when your ex-husband didn't see you. His eyes never left mine. People usually fake relief. You didn't. For the first time since the divorce, someone had noticed the truth. Not the performance. Not the tears. Not the carefully rehearsed heartbreak. The truth. Garrett slowly finished the last sip of his drink. Then he placed the empty glass on a nearby table. So, he slipped both hands into his pockets. Would you like to tell me why you've been watching me all evening? The system immediately lit up inside my mind. Excellent opportunity detected. Recommend initiating stage 1 of emotional engagement. I ignored it. Because for the first time, I didn't want a scripted answer. I wanted to tell him something real. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. The city lights reflected across the windows behind Garrett, turning the Denver skyline into a sea of gold and blue. He waited, patiently. He wasn't trying to fill the silence. He seemed perfectly comfortable letting me decide whether I wanted to answer. That alone caught me off guard. Most people rushed conversations. Garrett let them breathe. I was watching you, I finally admitted. I noticed. I was planning to come introduce myself. Were you? His voice remained calm. No rehearsed excuse. No. No accidental bumping into my table? I smiled. I considered that. I figured. He folded his arms. So why didn't you? I glanced toward Mason and Elise, now laughing with another couple across the lounge. Because they arrived. Garrett followed my gaze. Understanding quietly settled across his face. You didn't want your ex-husband to see you talking to me. Exactly. He nodded once. Reasonable. That wasn't the response I'd expected. You don't think it's strange? I think divorced people deserve the right to avoid uncomfortable conversations. That's surprisingly healthy. He smiled. Barely. I've always preferred practical solutions. The system interrupted. Host. Rapport level increasing. Please don't narrate my life. Acknowledged. Garrett motioned toward the empty chair across from his table. Seat. It wasn't really a question. For some reason, I did. The waiter appeared almost immediately. Garrett glanced toward me. What are you drinking? Honestly, I'd prefer that. Something with less regret than the last one. For the first time, he actually laughed. Not loudly. Just enough for the corner of his mouth to lift. I think we can arrange that. He ordered 2 glasses of red wine. The waiter disappeared. Garrett looked back at me. So, how have you been? Simple words. Yet no one had asked me that since the divorce. Everyone else asked about lawyers. About custody. About Mason. Nobody had asked about me. I looked out toward the mountains. I'm still figuring that out. Fair answer. You? I'm exactly where I've been for years. Working too much? Usually. Happy. He thought for a moment. Content. There's a difference. There is. Our wine arrived. Neither of us reached for it immediately. Garrett leaned back in his chair. I've wanted to ask you something for a long time. That sentence instantly put me on alert. What is it? When Mason introduced you 6 years ago, I felt my pulse quicken. You looked terrified. Not nervous. Not excited. Terrified. I stared at him. You noticed that? I notice most things. The system whispered urgently. Warning. Avoid revealing mission details. Garrett continued. I always wondered why. I smiled faintly. First impressions? No. He shook his head. It wasn't first date nerves. It looked like. He searched for the right words. Someone who had just accepted a responsibility far bigger than they wanted. Couldn't breathe. How had he seen that? Everyone else saw a young woman deeply in love. Garrett had seen fear. I was young. That's not what I asked. His eyes never left mine. You don't answer the question people ask. You answer the safer one. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I laughed quietly. You really are dangerous. I've been called worse. I believe it. Almost an hour passed without either of us noticing. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Not because we agreed on everything. Because Garrett actually listened. When I spoke, he didn't interrupt. When I paused, he waited. When I admitted I didn't know something, he didn't rush to solve it. Felt easy. Strangely easy. The system sounded confused. Host. What? Target interaction differs significantly from previous assignment. Eva noticed. Emotional synchronization exceeds predicted values. I don't even know what that means. Neither did the system. For the first time since I had accepted an assignment, nothing was unfolding according to its calculations. Garrett glanced toward his watch. It's getting late. I nodded. I should probably head home. I'll walk you downstairs. You don't have to. I know. He stood anyway. We rode the elevator down in comfortable silence. Outside, a cool Colorado breeze swept through downtown Denver. The streets glowed beneath rows of old brick buildings wrapped in warm cafe lights. My apartment was only a few blocks away. I can walk. Garrett looked around. It's nearly 11. I'll survive. I'm sure you will. He pulled a set of keys from his pocket. But I'd rather make sure. I looked at him suspiciously. Are you always this protective? No. Then why tonight? He held my gaze for several seconds. Because despite everything, I don't think you've had anyone looking out for you in a very long time. His words landed harder than he probably realized. Because he was right. For 7 years, I'd spent every waking moment taking care of someone else's future. No one had ever stopped to ask who was taking care of mine. I looked away before he could notice the emotion in my eyes. Thank you. He simply nodded. No need. We walked toward the parking garage together. Neither of us noticed. Across the street, a black SUV sat quietly beneath a street lamp. Inside, Mason had just finished dinner with Elise. As his vehicle waited at a red light, his eyes drifted toward the sidewalk. He frowned. For a split second, he could have sworn he'd just seen someone who looked exactly like Savannah, standing beside Garrett Mercer. Then the traffic light turned green. The SUV rolled forward, and the moment disappeared into the Denver night. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For the first time in years, there was no schedule waiting for me. No school lunches to pack. No business dinners to attend beside Mason. No pretending to be the perfect wife while silently watching another woman's name linger behind his eyes. The apartment was quiet. Almost too quiet. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows with a mug of coffee, watching the first light spill over downtown Denver. The system appeared again. Host. What now? Current mission progress. 4%. I nearly laughed. 4%. Initial contact established. Positive emotional response detected from target Garrett Mercer. You're measuring emotions now? Always. I shook my head. That's terrifying. Around noon, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. For a second, I assumed it was another furniture delivery. Instead, Garrett, I hope you survived the walk home. I stared at the screen. The system reacted immediately. Incoming communication from target. I can read. Another message appeared before I answered. Coffee this afternoon? No dramatic flirting. No games. No unnecessary compliments. Just coffee. I smiled without realizing it. Host emotional response detected. Stop monitoring my face. An hour later, I found myself sitting at a quiet coffee shop in Low-High, one of Denver's oldest neighborhoods. Large brick walls. Warm wooden tables. The smell of fresh espresso filled the room. Garrett arrived exactly on time. Not a minute early. Not a minute late. You actually came. You invited me. Some people say yes because they're being polite. I've never been very good at pretending. He looked amused.
Eva noticed.
He ordered black coffee.
No sugar. No cream.
Simple. We found a corner table away from the crowd. For several minutes we talked about completely ordinary things. Favorite hiking trails. Colorado winters. The best places to watch autumn leaves in the Rockies. Nothing personal. Nothing complicated. Felt normal. Almost unbelievably normal. So, Garrett stirred his coffee absent-mindedly. Can I ask something slightly inappropriate? Depends. Did your divorce surprise you? The question wasn't cruel. It was careful. Thoughtful. I considered lying. Instead,
No.
it didn't. You expected it? I knew it would happen eventually. He frowned slightly. Then why marry him? The system immediately interrupted. Warning. Classified mission history. I ignored it. Because I searched for words that weren't entirely false. I thought helping someone find happiness would eventually make me happy too. Garrett didn't speak. He simply watched me. I was wrong. His expression softened. I don't think that's wrong. It isn't.
No.
He leaned back. I think it's generous. Generosity becomes dangerous when you forget to leave some for yourself. His words lingered between us. Because they were true. Painfully true. Across town, Mason Holloway wasn't having the peaceful morning he'd expected. He sat inside his downtown office overlooking Union Station. Stacks of contracts covered his desk. His laptop remained open, but he hadn't read a single page in nearly 20 minutes. His assistant knocked softly. Mr. Holloway? You have the Henderson meeting in 10 minutes, right? She hesitated. Is everything okay? Of course. She nodded and quietly left. Everything was fine. So why couldn't he stop thinking about what he'd seen the night before? It had only been a glimpse. A woman who looked like Savannah, standing beside Garrett, talking, laughing. It shouldn't matter. They were divorced. She was free to see whoever she wanted. Then why did the image refuse to leave his mind? That evening, Mason mentioned it casually over dinner. Elise smiled as she placed grilled salmon onto his plate. What are you thinking about? He hesitated. I thought I saw Savannah yesterday. Elise looked up. Oh, she was with Garrett. She blinked. Garrett Mercer? I might have been mistaken. Elise smiled reassuringly. I'm sure Garrett was just being polite. Probably. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. You don't need to worry about her anymore. He nodded. I know. But strangely, those words didn't bring the relief he'd expected. Back at the cafe, Garrett suddenly asked, What are you smiling about? I realized I'd been staring out the window. I was just thinking. Dangerous habit. You think so? I've seen overthinking ruin perfectly good afternoons. I laughed. That's oddly specific. It comes from experience. We finished our coffee and stepped outside. A cool breeze swept through the streets. Denver buzzed with weekend energy. Street musicians performed near the plaza. Families walked their dogs. Cyclists passed in colorful jackets. Garrett looked toward the mountains. Do you hike? I used to. When was the last time? I searched my memory. Surprised me how long it took. 5 years. He looked genuinely confused. You're living in Colorado. I know. And you haven't hiked in 5 years? My life got busy. He nodded slowly. I have an idea. What? Next Saturday. He pointed west, where the Front Range stretched across the horizon. We're driving to Rocky Mountain National Park. I blinked. We. If you don't hate the idea. The system immediately displayed a notification. Relationship progression opportunity detected. I ignored it. Instead, I found myself smiling for a completely different reason. Because for the first time in years, someone wasn't inviting me somewhere because they needed something from me. Someone simply thought, I might enjoy the view. Saturday arrived wrapped in crisp mountain air and brilliant Colorado sunshine. For years, Saturdays had never really belonged to me. They belonged to Mason's work schedule, to client dinners, to charity events, to pretending we were the perfect family. Today, there was only one plan. Meet Garrett. I stood in front of my closet longer than I cared to admit. The system immediately noticed. Host is evaluating clothing options. I'm getting dressed. Host has changed outfits 4 times. I changed twice. Correction acknowledged. For attempts, 2 completed changes. I sighed. You really keep track of everything. Correct. I grabbed a navy hiking jacket, dark jeans, and my old trail boots. The same pair I hadn't worn in years. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back at me looked different. Not happier. Not yet. Just lighter. Garrett pulled up exactly at 8 o'clock in a dark green Jeep Wrangler coated with a thin layer of mountain dust. He stepped out wearing hiking boots and a gray flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. Morning. Morning. His eyes briefly scanned me. You actually own hiking boots. I've been to the mountains before. I wasn't sure. I smiled. I had a life before marriage. I suspected as much. He walked around and opened the passenger door. No flowers. He looked confused. For a hiking trip? I was joking. I know. His completely serious expression lasted another second before he quietly smiled. It was becoming easier to recognize Garrett's humor. Most people missed it entirely. The drive toward Rocky Mountain National Park was peaceful. Golden aspens lined sections of the highway while distant peaks disappeared beneath patches of fresh snow. Neither of us felt pressured to fill every silence. Music played quietly through the speakers. Classic rock. Nothing flashy. Eventually Garrett glanced toward me. Can I ask you something? You've asked that several times already. And you've answered. Fair enough. He kept his eyes on the road. What did you want before you married Mason? The question surprised me. No one had ever asked it. Not Mason. Not my friends. Not even the system. I looked out the window. I honestly don't know. You don't know? I stopped thinking about myself. That long ago? I nodded. My entire life became someone else's. Garrett was quiet. Then he said something so softly I almost missed it. That sounds lonely. I swallowed. It was. They reached Bear Lake Trailhead just before 10. The parking lot buzzed with hikers preparing backpacks and adjusting trekking poles. Children laughed while chasing squirrels. A golden retriever proudly carried its own leash through the crowd. Garrett handed me a bottle of water. Ready? I think so. The trail wound through towering pine trees, crystal clear streams, and enormous granite boulders. Everything smelled fresh. Alive. After nearly 40 minutes of hiking, they reached an overlook where snow-covered peaks stretched endlessly toward the horizon. I stopped walking. The view stole every remaining thought from my mind. I forgot. Garrett looked over. Forgot what? How beautiful Colorado is. You grew up here. I know. He leaned against a weathered wooden fence. Sometimes people stop seeing the places they live. I smiled faintly. That sounds like it means more than mountains. It usually does. Hundreds of miles away, Mason sat alone in his home office. The house was unusually quiet. Elise had gone shopping with friends. Owen was upstairs playing video games. His phone buzzed. It was a notification from social media. One of Garrett's coworkers had posted several photos from a morning hiking trip. Mason almost ignored it. Then, his thumb stopped. Second photograph. Garrett stood beside a woman wearing a navy hiking jacket. She was laughing. Really laughing. Head tilted back. Eyes closed. The smile looked effortless. It was Savannah. Mason stared at the screen. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her laugh like that. Certainly not during their marriage. His chest tightened unexpectedly. Why? He had exactly what he'd wanted. Elise was back. Their future had finally begun. So why did seeing Savannah genuinely happy feel strangely uncomfortable? Back on the trail, Garrett noticed me staring across the valley. "What are you thinking?" I smiled. "I don't think I'm thinking." He nodded approvingly. "Good. I've spent years thinking." It looked exhausting. It was. We continued walking until they reached a quiet alpine lake. The water reflected the surrounding mountains perfectly, almost like glass. Garrett sat on a fallen log. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Eventually, he broke the silence. "You know." "What?" "The first time I met you." I looked over. "I thought you were pretending." I laughed. "You were right." He smiled. "I know." The laughter faded. "So why didn't you ever say anything?" "I almost did." "What stopped you?" He looked across the lake. "Mason wouldn't have believed me." "And after that?" I realized something. "What?" I wasn't trying to convince him anymore. His voice remained calm. "I was trying to understand you." The words lingered between us. For reasons I couldn't explain, they mattered far more than they should have. The system quietly displayed another notification. Mission progress 11%. I glanced toward Garrett, then mentally dismissed the message. For the first time, I wasn't interested in percentages. I was interested in the conversation. The hike back felt shorter, not because the trail had changed, because the silence between Garrett and me no longer felt unfamiliar. It felt comfortable. Some people filled every quiet moment with conversation. Garrett never seemed afraid of silence. Oddly enough, neither was I anymore. As they reached the parking lot, Garrett unlocked the Jeep and tossed his backpack into the back seat. "Hungry. I could probably eat an entire pizza." He looked genuinely impressed. "That's the healthiest thing I've heard anyone say after a hike." "You were expecting a salad?" "I was expecting someone pretending they weren't hungry." "I stopped pretending." He smiled. "I'm beginning to notice." An hour later they sat on the outdoor patio of a small family-owned restaurant in Estes Park. Tourists wandered through the streets. Children chased each other between souvenir shops. A guitarist played old country songs outside a coffee shop across the road. Their food arrived. Cheeseburgers, French fries, fresh lemonade. Garrett picked up one fry. "I have another question." I laughed. "You're never going to run out, are you?" "Probably not." "What is it?" He looked directly at me. "When was the last time someone made you laugh?" I almost answered immediately. Then I stopped. I honestly couldn't remember. Not because nobody had tried. Because I hadn't really been present. My life had become a routine. Wake up. Take care of Owen. Support Mason. Smile when expected. Disappear into the background. Repeat. Finally, "I don't know." Garrett nodded. "I figured. You did. I've spent years watching people." He leaned back. "The ones carrying the heaviest weight usually forget how to laugh." I quietly looked down at my plate. Maybe he wasn't reading me. Maybe he was seeing me. The system interrupted. Host emotional attachment increasing. I ignored it. Recommendation. Maintain professional boundaries. Still ignored. Host. What? Current behavioral pattern deviates from mission protocol. I know. Explanation requested. I smiled to myself. I don't want to explain. For the first time, the system remained silent. Across town, Mason sat in the backyard while Owen kicked a soccer ball across the lawn. "Dad." "What? Can you pass it?" Mason gently kicked the ball back. Normally he enjoyed these afternoons. Today, his thoughts kept drifting elsewhere. Owen noticed. "Dad." You're missing." Mason blinked. "I'm standing right here." Owen shook his head.
No.
"You're thinking." Children had an incredible ability to simplify complicated truths. Mason forced a smile. "I guess I am." Owen trapped the ball beneath his shoe. "About Mom." Mason froze. "Why would you ask that?" "You always get that face." "What face?" "The one where you're looking at something, but you're really somewhere else." For a long moment, Mason couldn't answer. Later that evening, Elise returned home carrying several shopping bags. She immediately noticed his unusual mood. "Long day." "You could say that." She poured herself a glass of sparkling water. "Everything okay at work?" "It's not work." She sat beside him. "What is it?" Mason hesitated, then quietly admitted, "I saw a picture of Savannah today." Elise smiled gently. "Oh." She looked. He searched for the right word. "Different." "In what way?" "Happier." Elise laughed softly. "Isn't that a good thing?" "It should be." "But." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't understand it." She looked at him carefully. What exactly don't you understand? I thought. He stopped. What? I thought she'd have a harder time moving on. The silence that followed felt unexpectedly heavy. Elise set her glass down. Mason. You divorced her. I know. You told her you'd never loved her. I know. You moved in with me 3 days later. I know. She reached for his hand. So why are you surprised that she's trying to build a new life? He stared at the floor. Because deep inside, that wasn't what bothered him. What bothered him was that she didn't seem broken. That same evening, Garrett drove me home. As we stopped outside my apartment building, neither of us reached for the door. So, I said. So, I had a good time. I know. I laughed. You sound awfully confident. I watched you smile 34 times today. I stared at him. You counted.
No.
He smiled. I estimated. I'm starting to think you're impossible. I've heard that before. I reached for the door handle, then paused. Garrett. Yeah. Can I ask you one last question? Of course. Why did you agree to spend an entire Saturday with your best friend's ex-wife? He looked out through the windshield for several seconds before answering. When Mason introduced you years ago. I remember. I didn't like you. I definitely remember that. He nodded. I thought you were hiding something. I was. I know. He turned toward me. But today. His expression softened. I realized I was wrong about one thing. What? I thought you were pretending to be someone else. He smiled quietly. The truth is, you were trying so hard to become the person everyone else needed, that nobody ever asked who you actually were. His words stole every answer I had. I stepped out of the Jeep without saying another word. As I reached the entrance to my building, my phone vibrated. A new notification. Not from Garrett. Not from Mason. From the system. Warning. Primary mission parameters have changed. I stopped walking. What? For the first time in 7 years, the mechanical voice sounded uncertain. New variable detected. Target Garrett Mercer is no longer following his originally assigned destiny. A cold chill ran down my spine. What does that mean? Several long seconds passed. Then, the answer appeared. Host, your presence has altered the future. I stood frozen on the sidewalk outside my apartment building. The cool Denver air suddenly felt much colder. Cars rolled past. Someone laughed across the street. A train horn echoed in the distance. Yet all I could hear was the system. Host, your actions have created an unexpected divergence. I frowned. You said that already. Previous missions remained within acceptable predictive limits. And this one, a brief pause. Prediction confidence has fallen below 52%. That had never happened before. Not once. The system had always known exactly what would happen next. Every conversation, every breakup, every reunion, every ending. Now, it sounded almost uncertain. Explain. Garrett Mercer's original emotional trajectory is no longer stable. What does that actually mean? Another pause. Longer this time. Finally, he is making decisions that cannot be explained by his original behavioral model. I stared into the night. So, because of me? Affirmative. For the first time since becoming part of the system, I wasn't simply following someone else's story. I had changed it. The next morning, Garrett woke before sunrise. His townhouse overlooked Sloan's Lake, and early morning runners were already circling the water. Normally, Sunday mornings followed the same routine. Coffee, emails, an hour reviewing contracts before the week began. Predictable, efficient, comfortable. Instead, he stood at the kitchen counter holding a coffee mug that had gone cold nearly 20 minutes earlier. His younger sister, Lena Mercer, walked downstairs wearing an oversized college sweatshirt. She stopped halfway into the kitchen. You look weird. Garrett glanced up. Good morning to you too. I'm serious. She opened the refrigerator. You've been staring out that window for 5 minutes. I've been thinking. She laughed. Oh, that's dangerous. He smiled faintly. Someone said something similar yesterday. Lena closed the refrigerator door. A woman. Garrett looked at her. How did you know? Because you've never stared out a window over one of your clients. Fair point. She poured herself orange juice before sitting across from him. So, who is she? He hesitated. Her name's Savannah. Lena nearly dropped her glass. Wait, Savannah? Mason's ex-wife? Garrett nodded once. Her eyebrows shot up. I definitely wasn't expecting that. Neither was I. Lena studied her brother carefully. She had known Garrett her entire life. He wasn't impulsive. He wasn't reckless. And he certainly didn't develop an interest in people overnight. So, she asked carefully, what happened? Garrett thought about the answer. We talked. She blinked. That's it. We hiked. And we had lunch. And he looked genuinely confused. What do you mean? And Lena leaned forward. Garrett, you've known hundreds of women. You've had dinner with judges, CEOs, senators. She pointed at him. I have never seen you spend an entire weekend thinking about one conversation. He looked away. I know. And that's what's bothering you. He quietly nodded. Across Denver, Savannah sat cross-legged on the floor of her apartment surrounded by unopened moving boxes. She had every intention of unpacking. Instead, she kept replaying yesterday in her mind. Not because anything dramatic had happened. Because nothing had. There had been no manipulation. No pretending. No carefully rehearsed version of herself. For the first time in years, someone had simply enjoyed her company. The realization felt strangely unfamiliar. The system interrupted. Post-emotional baseline has changed. I noticed. Recommendation. Reduce unnecessary contact with target. Why? Attachment increases unpredictability. Savannah smiled. I think that's the point. The system offered no response. Around noon, her phone rang. The caller ID surprised her. Owen. She answered immediately. Hey, sweetheart.
Mom.
His cheerful voice instantly brightened the apartment. Guess what? What? Dad bought me a fishing pole. That's exciting. And Aunt Elise says we might go camping next weekend. I'm sure you'll have fun. There was a brief pause. Then Owen asked quietly, Mom. Yes. Are you happy? The question caught her completely off guard. What makes you ask that? You sound different. She smiled softly. Different how? Lighter. Children noticed everything. Even through a phone call. I think. She answered honestly, I'm learning how to be.
I'm glad.
His words were simple, yet somehow they meant more than anything an adult could have said. I miss you. I miss you too. When can I see you? How about Wednesday after school? Really? Really? I'll tell Dad. He hung up before she could even say goodbye. Savannah laughed. A real laugh. One that echoed through the empty apartment. Later that afternoon, Mason returned home carrying groceries. As he stepped into the kitchen, he found Owen practically bouncing with excitement. Dad, what happened? I talked to Mom. Mason smiled. That's good. She's really happy. His smile faltered almost imperceptibly. Oh, yeah. She laughed. Mason slowly placed the grocery bags on the counter. Did she? Owen nodded enthusiastically. I've never heard her laugh like that before. For reasons he couldn't explain, those words stayed with Mason long after the conversation ended. Because he realized something unsettling. Neither had he. Not once during 6 years of marriage. And for the first time, he began to wonder whether he had ever truly known the woman he had called his wife. Wednesday arrived with clear skies and the kind of cool autumn air that made Colorado feel almost unreal. Savannah parked outside Owen's elementary school 15 minutes early. She wasn't nervous. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. The system quietly interrupted. Post heart rate elevated by 18%. I'm excited to see my son. Acknowledged. Children poured through the front doors in every direction. Parents waved. Teachers smiled. Then, she spotted him. Mom! Owen ran across the sidewalk so fast that his backpack bounced wildly behind him. Savannah barely had time to kneel before he threw his arms around her. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The noise. The traffic. The system. Everything. Hey, buddy. I missed you. I missed you too. He stepped back and looked at her carefully. You really are smiling more. She laughed. Am I? Yep. You look different. Children really did notice everything. They spent the afternoon walking through Washington Park. Owen insisted on feeding ducks. Then he wanted ice cream. Then hot chocolate because the ice cream made him cold. By the end of the afternoon, Savannah had agreed to all of it. They laughed more in 3 hours than they had during the last several months together. As the sun began to set, they sat on a wooden bench overlooking the lake. Owen kicked his feet back and forth. Mom. Can I ask something? You can ask me anything. He hesitated. Are you and Dad happier now? Savannah looked across the water. Children asked questions adults spent years avoiding. I think. She chose her words carefully. Sometimes people are happier after they stop pretending. Owen frowned. Pretending what? That they're living the life they're supposed to live. He thought about that for almost a minute. Then he nodded. I think Dad smiles more.
I'm glad.
And you smile more. I'm glad about that too. He leaned against her shoulder. So everybody wins? Savannah smiled. I hope so. Across town, Mason sat through a meeting without hearing half the presentation. Numbers flashed across the conference room screen. Investors discussed expansion plans. Someone asked for his opinion. What do you think, Mason? He blinked.
I'm sorry.
Could you repeat the question? The room fell unusually quiet. His business partner raised an eyebrow. That almost never happened. Mason was always focused, always prepared. Today, his mind refused to cooperate. After the meeting, Garrett caught up with him in the parking garage. You disappeared pretty quickly. I've got another meeting. Garrett knew immediately that wasn't true. You've canceled it twice. Mason sighed. You keeping tabs on me now?
No.
You've just been distracted all week. They stood beside Mason's truck. Finally, Garrett asked the question. Is this about Savannah? Mason looked surprised. What makes you think that? Garrett smiled faintly. You've said her name 4 times in the last 3 days. I have. You have. Mason leaned against the truck. I don't know what's wrong with me. Garrett stayed quiet. I wanted this. I know. I loved Elise. I know. I don't regret the divorce. Garrett nodded. I believe you. Mason rubbed his forehead. Then why can't I stop thinking about Savannah? Garrett looked at his oldest friend for several seconds, then answered honestly. Maybe. You aren't thinking about your marriage. Mason frowned. What do you mean? I think you're trying to understand something. What? Garrett's voice remained calm. The woman you lived with for 6 years. Mason looked confused. I knew her. Garrett didn't answer immediately. Finally he asked, Did you? Those 2 simple words followed Mason all the way home. Did you? Of course he knew Savannah. Didn't he? He knew her favorite coffee. He knew she hated thunderstorms. He knew she always organized the kitchen the same way. He knew she liked old bookstores. He knew. He suddenly realized something unsettling. Everything he knew about Savannah involved habits, routines, preferences. He couldn't remember the last meaningful conversation they had shared. He couldn't remember asking about her dreams, or her fears, or what she wanted from life. His stomach tightened. Had he ever actually known her? Or had he simply accepted that she would always be there? That evening, Savannah's phone buzzed. Garrett, how was your afternoon with Owen? She smiled. Perfect. Almost instantly, another message appeared. I was hoping you'd say that. She hesitated before replying. How was your day? There was a longer pause this time. Then, complicated. Everything okay? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, returned again. Finally, Mason asked me something today. Savannah sat up a little straighter. What did he ask? Garrett's reply came almost immediately. He asked why he couldn't stop thinking about you. Her fingers froze above the screen. The apartment suddenly felt much quieter. The system reappeared. Alert. Original timeline deviation accelerating. Savannah ignored it. She continued staring at Garrett's message. A few seconds later, another text arrived. I didn't tell him anything. Before she could answer, the system issued a warning unlike any it had ever given before. Critical notice. 2 primary emotional paths are beginning to intersect. Probability of irreversible timeline alteration. 81%. Savannah slowly lowered the phone. For the first time, she wasn't sure whether the greatest danger was losing the mission or following it. Savannah didn't answer Garrett's message. Not immediately. She placed her phone face down on the kitchen counter and walked toward the window. Downtown Denver sparkled beneath the night sky. People hurried home. Traffic crawled along Interstate 25. Life continued as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The system had never issued a critical warning before. Never. Not once. Explain. Its familiar voice responded almost instantly. Original emotional architecture has become unstable. I need something more specific. Target Mason Holloway is displaying unexpected attachment to a completed assignment. And Garrett? A longer pause. Target Garrett Mercer is forming an emotional bond outside his assigned future. Savannah closed her eyes. So, there isn't a correct outcome anymore? For several seconds, nothing. Then, correct. Those single words landed harder than she expected. For the first time, there was no script. No guaranteed ending. No carefully calculated future. Only choices. The following morning, Garrett arrived at his law firm before anyone else. Normally the quiet helped him concentrate. Today, it only amplified his thoughts. He opened a contract. Read the first paragraph. Realized he hadn't absorbed a single word. His assistant knocked lightly. Morning. He looked up. Morning, Claire. You've got the Morrison meeting in 20 minutes. Right? She hesitated. Everything okay? I'm fine. She smiled politely. You've said, I'm fine 3 times this morning. Garrett looked at her. I have. She nodded. And every time you've been staring out the window. After she left, Garrett leaned back in his chair. His phone rested beside his laptop. He picked it up, locked it, unlocked it again. Finally, he typed a message. Would you like to have dinner tonight? He stared at it. Deleted it. Typed again. There's a place near Union Station I've wanted to try. Deleted that too. He sighed. When did this become difficult? Across town, Mason stood in the kitchen making breakfast while Owen colored dinosaurs at the table. Dad. Yeah. Can Mom come to my soccer game on Saturday? Of course. And Aunt Elise too? Mason smiled. If everyone's comfortable with that. Owen nodded enthusiastically. I want everybody there. Children had a remarkable ability to imagine impossible things. In Owen's mind, the people he loved should simply get along. He couldn't understand why adults made everything so complicated. Neither, increasingly, could Mason. That afternoon, Savannah decided to stop hiding inside her apartment. She wandered through Larimer Square, browsing small bookstores and local art galleries. For years, she had rushed through places like this, always checking the time, always making sure dinner was ready before Mason got home. Now, she stopped wherever she wanted. She spent 20 minutes inside a tiny bookstore reading the first chapter of a novel she never intended to buy. She sampled handmade chocolate from a local shop. She watched a street violinist perform for nearly half an hour. Nobody expected anything from her. Nobody needed her to become someone else. Freedom turned out to be surprisingly quiet. Her phone vibrated. Garrett. This time, he had actually sent the message. Dinner tonight? She smiled.
No digerst invitation.
No clever line. Just honesty. She replied. I'd like that. Almost immediately, his response appeared. 7 o'clock? Perfect. The system interrupted. Host is proceeding despite unresolved timeline instability. Yes. Reason. Savannah looked at the screen. Then quietly answered. Because I want to. The system remained silent. Perhaps it had no response for free will. At exactly 7, Savannah arrived at a restored historic restaurant near Union Station. Warm lights glowed through exposed brick walls. Soft jazz drifted through the dining room. Garrett was already waiting. You beat me. I got here 3 minutes ago. You counted. I always count. She laughed. I'm learning that. He pulled out her chair. So. She smiled. So. I almost canceled. Her eyebrows lifted. Really? He nodded. I haven't been nervous about dinner since college. She couldn't help smiling. I wasn't exactly calm either. Their waiter arrived. They ordered. Conversation flowed naturally. Travel, books, favorite childhood memories. For nearly an hour, neither of them mentioned Mason. Neither mentioned divorce. Neither felt the need to. Then, Garrett asked quietly, Can I tell you something? Always. He looked directly into her eyes. I think I misjudged you. She tilted her head. You've mentioned that before. I didn't mean during your marriage. What do you mean? I misjudged you. Last weekend. She looked confused. I thought you were just recovering from a difficult divorce. And, he smiled faintly. I don't think that's what's happening. What do you think is happening? Garrett took a slow breath. I think you're discovering who you've always been. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Because somehow, he had described exactly what she couldn't find words for herself. At that exact moment, across the restaurant, the front door opened. Savannah happened to glance toward it. Her smile slowly disappeared. Walking inside, hand in hand, were Mason and Elise. Neither of them had seen her. Yet, for one long second, the entire restaurant seemed to fall silent. Savannah instinctively looked away. Not because she was afraid. Because she didn't want the evening to become about the past. Garrett noticed the change immediately. What happened? She didn't answer. Instead, she glanced toward the entrance. Garrett followed her gaze. His expression remained unreadable. Mason. And Elise. Savannah nodded. They haven't seen us. Not yet. Garrett leaned back calmly. So, what do you want to do? The question surprised her. What do you mean? We have options. He counted them on his fingers. We can leave. We can stay. Or we can pretend they don't exist. No panique. No drama. Just choices. Savannah realized something. For years, every difficult situation had felt like a trap. Garrett never treated problems that way. He simply looked for options. She smiled. I don't want to run. Good. Neither do I. Meanwhile, Mason and Elise were being escorted to a table only a few rows away. So this is the place everyone keeps talking about? Elise asked. I've heard it's excellent. Mason nodded absent-mindedly. His attention drifted around the dining room. Then, he froze. His eyes locked onto Savannah. She was sitting across from Garrett, laughing softly at something he had just said. Not pretending. Not forcing a smile. Actually laughing. For several seconds, he simply stared. Elise noticed immediately. Mason? He didn't answer. Mason. He blinked. What are you looking at? Slowly, she followed his line of sight. Then she saw them. Garrett. Savannah. Together. Elise looked back at Mason. His expression unsettled her. Not because he looked angry. Because he looked lost. They look good together. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Mason didn't respond. They really do. Still nothing. She quietly reached across the table. Mason. He looked at her. What's going through your head? He searched for an answer. Finally, I don't know. That wasn't entirely true. He knew exactly what he was feeling. He simply couldn't explain why. Watching Savannah smile at another man shouldn't have affected him. He had walked away. He had chosen this life. So why did it feel like something was quietly slipping beyond his reach? Back at Savannah's table, the waiter placed 2 entrees in front of them. Garrett thanked him before noticing Savannah glance toward Mason again. You okay? She nodded. I think so. You don't sound convinced. She smiled faintly. I'm trying to understand something. What? I thought seeing him with Elise would hurt. And it doesn't. Garrett remained silent. It feels. She searched for the right word. Finished. He smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. She looked at him. Were you? I don't like unfinished stories. For reasons she couldn't explain, his words made her heart beat just a little faster. Across the room, Mason wasn't hearing a single word the waiter was saying. His attention kept drifting back. Garrett leaned forward as he spoke. Savannah laughed again. Not once. Not politely. Repeatedly. The sound reached Mason even through the conversations surrounding them. It struck him with unexpected force. A memory surfaced. 6 years earlier. Their honeymoon in Telluride. He remembered Savannah trying to make him laugh after a long day. She'd told terrible jokes. Made ridiculous impressions. Done everything she could think of. He had smiled politely. Then returned to answering work emails. Back then, he never questioned why her smile slowly became quieter over the years. Now, watching another man effortlessly bring that smile back, he finally understood what he'd failed to notice. Elise quietly watched him. She didn't need him to say anything. His eyes said enough. A heavy realization settled over her. She wasn't competing with Savannah. She never had been. She had always known Mason loved her. But perhaps, without realizing it, he had also grown to depend on someone else. Not with passionate love. Not the kind he once felt for Elise. Something different. Something quieter. The comfort of knowing that every evening, someone would be waiting at home. Someone who remembered how he took his coffee. Someone who asked whether he'd eaten. Someone who quietly carried half of his life without asking for recognition. He hadn't fallen in love with Savannah. He had simply never imagined a future where she wasn't there. And now, for the first time, he was living in that future. Garrett suddenly looked toward Mason. Their eyes met across the restaurant. Neither man looked away. Years of friendship passed between them without a single word. Finally, Garrett gave a small, respectful nod. Nothing more. Mason nodded back. Neither hostility, nor victory, just understanding. Savannah noticed the exchange. What was that? Garrett smiled. Two old friends admitting that life doesn't always follow the plan. She looked at him carefully. And are you okay with that? He answered without hesitation. I've spent my career believing every problem has a predictable solution. He reached for his glass. You've convinced me otherwise. At that exact moment, the system appeared once more. But this time, its voice sounded weaker than ever. Host. She didn't answer. Future projections unavailable. Garrett was saying something. She never heard the end of the sentence. Because the next words from the system changed everything. The program is beginning to lose control. Savannah didn't react. Not outwardly. She simply looked at Garrett as though nothing had happened. But inside, everything had. The program is beginning to lose control. 7 years. 7 years of hearing absolute certainty. Every prediction. Every instruction. Every outcome. Now, for the first time, the system sounded afraid. Host. I hear you. Emergency correction protocol recommended. What does that mean? A brief pause. Longer than usual. Reduce contact with target Garrett Mercer immediately. Savannah almost laughed. You've never asked me to leave a target before. Current interaction exceeds acceptable deviation limits. So you're worried? No answer. That was answer enough. Garrett noticed the distant look in her eyes. You disappeared for a second. She blinked.
I'm sorry.
Everything okay? She hesitated, then smiled. I think I'm finally realizing something. And what's that? 4 years. I let other people decide what my life was supposed to look like. He listened quietly. I don't think I want anyone making those decisions anymore. Garrett's expression softened. I'd say that's progress. Across the restaurant, dinner was over. Elise quietly placed her napkin beside her plate. Mason. He looked up. We should go. He glanced toward Savannah one last time. She was smiling again. Not at him. Garrett. He nodded. You're right. As they stood, something unexpected happened. Savannah noticed them leaving. For a split second, their eyes met.
No anger. No bitterness. No regret.
She simply offered a small, polite smile. The kind strangers exchange in passing. Then she returned to her conversation. Mason felt something inside him quietly collapse. Not because she hated him. Because she didn't. She had truly let him go. Outside, cold evening air wrapped around downtown Denver. Garrett and Savannah walked slowly toward Union Station. Street musicians still played beneath strings of glowing lights. People laughed as they stepped onto passing trains. The city felt alive. Neither of them hurried. Finally, Garrett spoke. I've been thinking. Dangerous. I know. He smiled. But I need to say this. She waited. I spent years believing people never really changed. And now. You've made me question that. Savannah looked at him. I didn't do anything. You did. You stopped pretending. He took a slow breath. And somehow, you gave me permission to stop pretending too. She frowned slightly. What were you pretending? He laughed quietly. That work was enough. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. My entire life has been deadlines. Courtrooms. Contracts. Winning. Repeat. I convinced myself that if I kept succeeding, eventually I'd feel like I was living. He looked toward the mountains in the distance. It never happened. Savannah smiled gently. I know that feeling. Her phone vibrated. The screen lit up. Mason. She stopped walking. Garrett noticed immediately. You don't have to answer. I know. The phone continued vibrating, then stopped. A second later, a voicemail notification appeared. Savannah stared at the screen. The system interrupted again. Recommendation. Ignore communication. Instead, she opened the voicemail. Mason's voice filled the silence. He sounded unusually uncertain. I know it's late. A long pause. I wanted to ask how you're doing. Another pause. I realized. I don't think I ever asked before. The message ended. Nothing dramatic.
No confession. No apology.
Just one simple question. One he should have asked years ago. Savannah quietly locked her phone. Garrett didn't ask what the message said. He simply continued walking beside her. After several moments, she broke the silence. He asked if I was okay. Garrett nodded. And are you? She looked up at the Colorado sky. Stars had begun appearing above the city. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she answered without hesitation. Yeah, I really am. Later that night, Mason sat alone in the living room. Elise had already gone to bed. The house was silent. He replayed the voicemail in his mind. Not what he'd said. What he hadn't said. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't thanked her. He hadn't acknowledged everything she'd quietly done for their family. Somehow, those words had never seemed urgent. Until now. His phone remained in his hand. He considered calling again. Instead, he placed it face down on the table. Some conversations could only happen if the other person still wanted to listen. And for the first time, he wasn't sure Savannah did. Meanwhile, inside her apartment, Savannah stood by the window with a cup of tea. The city lights reflected softly against the glass. The system appeared one more time. Its voice was noticeably weaker. Host. What? Core operational stability has fallen below minimum threshold. What happens now? Silence. Longer than ever before. Finally, unknown. Savannah smiled. Unknown. That word no longer frightened her. For years, every step of her life had been planned, predicted, controlled. Maybe the future wasn't supposed to be known. Maybe that was what made it worth living. Then suddenly, every light in her apartment flickered. Her teacup trembled in her hand. The system's voice became distorted. Critical error. Primary network. Disconnecting. The words broke apart into static. And then, complete silence. For the first time since the day she entered Mason's life, Savannah was completely alone. And strangely, she had never felt more free. Silence. Real silence. Not the brief pauses between the system's instructions. Not the moments when it processed information. The silence felt
permanent.
Savannah stood motionless in the middle of her apartment. For 7 years there had always been another voice inside her mind. Calculating. Correcting. Predicting. Now, there was nothing. She waited. 1 minute. Then another.
No notification.
No mission update.
No mechanical interruption.
Only her own heartbeat. She whispered into the empty room. Are you still there? Nothing answered. For the first time since she could remember, every thought belonged entirely to her. The following morning, she woke expecting to hear the familiar greeting. Nothing. She smiled before even opening her eyes.
No objectives. No percentajes.
No assigned future. Only another ordinary day. She made coffee. Opened every window in the apartment. The cool Colorado air drifted inside. Somewhere below, a street musician was already playing guitar. It was just another Thursday. Yet somehow, it felt like the first day of her real life. Her phone buzzed. Garrett. Good morning. No complicated message. No pressure. Just 2 simple words. Savannah found herself smiling. Morning. Almost instantly, another text arrived. Any plans today? She stared at the screen, then realized something amusing. For years, she always had plans. Someone else's plans. Today, she honestly didn't know. Not yet. Garrett replied almost immediately. Perfect. Then don't make any. She laughed softly. Why? Because sometimes the best days are the ones nobody schedules. She looked out the window. Maybe he was right. Meanwhile, Mason sat alone in his office. His work was piling up. 3 contracts needed signatures. 2 conference calls had already been postponed. His assistant entered carefully. You have visitors. I didn't schedule anyone. I know. She hesitated. It's Garrett. Mason looked surprised. Send him in. A few seconds later, Garrett walked into the office. Neither man spoke immediately. They had known each other for over 15 years. Business partners. Fishing buddies. Best friends. Sometimes, silence carried more meaning than conversation. Finally Mason broke it. You came to talk about her. Garrett nodded. I did. Mason leaned back. I figured. For several seconds, neither of them knew where to begin. Finally Garrett spoke. I don't want to lose our friendship. Mason looked directly at him. I don't either. Garrett continued. But I also don't want to lie to you. Another long silence. Then, I like Savannah.
No excuses. No careful wording.
Just the truth. Mason lowered his eyes. I know. I wasn't looking for this. I know. I never planned. I know. Garrett stopped talking. He realized something. Mason wasn't angry. He looked tired. Very tired. Finally Mason smiled.
A sad,
almost nostalgic smile. You know what's strange? What? I spent years believing I understood what love was. Garrett stayed quiet. I thought love meant never letting go of your first love. He looked toward the mountains beyond his office window. Now I think. I confused love with memory. Garrett listened carefully. I loved Elise. I truly did. But somewhere along the way, I forgot to appreciate the person standing right beside me. He sighed deeply. And by the time I noticed, it was already too late. Garrett didn't know what to say. There wasn't a perfect response. Sometimes, people simply needed someone willing to listen. Finally, Mason looked back at him. Can I ask you something? Of course. Do you make her happy? Garrett answered without hesitation. I hope so. Mason smiled faintly. That's a good answer. He stood and walked toward the window. You know, when I saw the two of you together, I was jealous. Garrett looked surprised. Not because I wanted her back. He shook his head slowly. Because I realized I had never seen her smile that way. His voice grew quieter. And I was the reason. Across the city, Savannah wandered through the Denver Botanic Gardens alone. She hadn't planned to come here. She had simply followed whichever streets looked interesting. Flowers swayed gently in the afternoon breeze. Families wandered through the pathways. Children chased butterflies across the open lawns. For years, she had rushed through places like this. Today, she stopped whenever she wanted. She sat beside a quiet pond and watched koi fish glide beneath the water. No destination.
No deadline.
No mission. Just peace. For a while, that was enough. Her phone vibrated again. This time it was Owen.
Mom. Sweetheart.
You know what? What? Dad's smiling again. She smiled.
I'm glad.
And Aunt Elisa's smiling too. That's good. Then Owen added something unexpected. You know who else smiles a lot? Who? You. Savannah laughed.
Igesido.
I like this version of you. The words hit her harder than he could possibly know. Children never cared about perfect parents. They only wanted happy ones. I love you, buddy. I love you too, Mom. After the call ended, she sat quietly beside the pond, watching ripples spread across the water. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about what came next. She wasn't afraid of tomorrow, because tomorrow finally belonged to her. Autumn slowly gave way to winter. The first heavy snowfall covered Denver in white, while the Rocky Mountains looked as though someone had painted them overnight. 3 months passed. Not once did the system return. At first, Savannah found herself waiting for it. Every quiet morning, every difficult decision, every unexpected moment of happiness. Part of her expected that familiar mechanical voice to interrupt. It never did. Eventually, she stopped listening for it. Life settled into something wonderfully ordinary. She found a position as the program director for a nonprofit community center that organized after-school activities for children across the Denver metro area. The work wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with executive titles or luxury offices. But every afternoon the building filled with laughter, basketball games, art classes, science clubs, and noisy conversations. For the first time, her energy was spent building something she actually cared about, not maintaining someone else's future. One evening, a volunteer watched Savannah helping a nervous little girl finish a painting. You've got a gift with kids. Savannah smiled. I've had a good teacher. Owen. She nodded. He taught me that children don't need perfection. They just need someone who shows up. As she said the words, she realized they applied to adults too. Garrett became part of that ordinary life without either of them forcing it. There wasn't a dramatic confession. No movie-style grand gesture.
No impossible coincidence.
He simply kept showing up. Coffee on busy mornings. Weekend hikes when the weather allowed. Long conversations that somehow never ran out. Some evenings they cooked dinner together. Other nights they ordered pizza and argued over crossword puzzles they rarely finished. Nothing about it felt rushed. Nothing felt scripted. Simply, fit. One snowy Saturday they walked through downtown Golden after spending the afternoon at a small bookstore. Garrett carried 2 cups of hot chocolate. I've been thinking. Savannah laughed. I know that sentence usually changes my day. It might. They stopped on a pedestrian bridge overlooking Clear Creek. Snowflakes drifted lazily onto the water. I used to believe relationships were built by finding the perfect person. He looked at her. I don't anymore. What do you believe now? I think they're built by finding someone you never have to pretend around. Savannah felt tears gathering in her eyes. Not from sadness. From recognition. Because she finally understood why being with Garrett felt so different. He had never asked her to become anyone else. He had simply welcomed the person she already was. She reached for his hand. I was afraid I'd forgotten who that person was. He smiled. I think she was just waiting for someone to stop giving her directions. Across town, life had found its own rhythm for Mason and Elise. It wasn't perfect. No relationship ever was. But it was honest. One Saturday afternoon, Owen scored his first goal of the soccer season. Both sidelines erupted into cheers. Savannah clapped beside Garrett. A few yards away, Mason and Elise celebrated just as loudly. After the game, Owen ran straight toward the adults. Did you all see that? We definitely saw it. Mason laughed. I kicked it with my left foot. It was an amazing shot, Savannah said proudly. Owen looked around at everyone standing together, then smiled. This is nice. The adults exchanged amused glances. What is? Elise asked. Nobody's pretending. Silence settled over the group. Children had a way of saying exactly what everyone else struggled to express. Mason looked toward Savannah. I owe you something. She tilted her head. You don't have to.
Ido.
He took a slow breath.
I'm sorry.
For all the years I appreciated what you did. Without appreciating you, the apology wasn't dramatic. It wasn't meant to change the past. It simply acknowledged it. Savannah smiled warmly. Thank you. Then, after a brief pause, she added, I forgive you. There were no tears. No lingering resentment. Only peace. Some endings didn't need revenge. They only needed acceptance. That evening, Savannah and Garrett drove into the foothills west of Boulder to watch the sunset over the snow-covered mountains. The world stretched endlessly before them. Orange light faded into purple skies. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, Garrett broke the silence. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd met years earlier? Savannah smiled. I used to. And now? She looked across the mountains.
No.
Why not? Because I needed to become this version of myself before I could recognize this version of you. Garrett nodded slowly. I was hoping you'd say something wiser than I would have. She laughed. You'll have to settle for honest. I always will. He slipped his hand into hers. Together they watched the last sunlight disappear behind the Rockies. Somewhere, far beyond anything Savannah could see, a silent screen flickered to life. One final message appeared. Mission status. Assignment. Closed. Unexpected outcome recorded. Host achieved independent future. After several seconds, the words slowly disappeared. Then one final line appeared. No further missions required. The screen faded into darkness. Forever. Sometimes people believe happiness comes from finding the right person. Sometimes they believe it comes from fixing the past. But life rarely works that way. Real happiness often begins much later, the moment we stop living the story someone else wrote for us. And finally, have the courage to write our own.